Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card. Today I'm using a stencil for the March challenge, which I'm really excited about, our first challenge. For this card I'm going to be using the Simon Says Stamp Irregular Dot Stencil. You can see I've already used it. And some Simon Says Stamp Sunshine ink along with some Colorbox white pigment ink. You can use any pigment ink for this, any white pigment. So I'm going to center my stencil on my crumb cake cardstock here. It's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to use my surgical tape to adhere it to the back. Now I've had some people say that their tape actually removes the paper, and so I suggested, based on a video that I saw with Jill Foster, that you stick it to your t-shirt, sweater, shirt and kind of remove some of the stick before using it. So I'm going to adhere the back of the paper so that it won't show through and it won't cover actually any of my crumb cake. Now this is the container that I store my sponge daubers in, and I'm going to pull out one for my white pigment ink. So I'm going to put it on my finger and I'm going to gently cover all of these dots with white ink. And so I'm kind of using a circular motion, and I'm being careful to make sure that I get all the way to the edge of all of these circles. And it takes a little bit of time, and you want to make sure it's a very smooth coverage. So sometimes, you know, because it's a pigment ink and it can get a little thick, you want to make sure that it's not darker in some areas than others. So just make sure you get a nice even coverage along all of these different areas, and you can use any stencil for this. Alright, so I'm finishing this up here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over, and then I'll take it off, take the stencil off, and I'm going to let this dry. I actually let it dry overnight, which is interesting because we'll see what happens with the surgical tape when you leave it on overnight. So I'm going to put the stencil back on there, and I'm going to kind of smush it back into the tape, which is still there and still sticky. And then I'm going to take my Sunshine yellow ink and a sponge dauber. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to color the kind of the left side of the circle in a much darker shade. So you can see I'm taking my time here to really make sure I get a dark edge on the 6, 7, 8 o'clock side of the circle. And then I'm going to work it around. I'm going to work it up to 3 o'clock and up to 12 o'clock. And then I'm going to make the full circle, but I'm going to be careful not to come in too far in the 1 o'clock range. So then I'm going to go back to, let's see, 7 o'clock and then move toward the center. So when I'm finished, I've got kind of the upper right quadrant is more of the white color, and then the rest is yellow, with the darkest being in the 6, 7, 8 o'clock range. So I'm going to go ahead and do all these circles, and with the small ones I ended up kind of slanting my dauber a little bit, so I'm just using the edge of the spongy tip. So I'm going to do all of these, and you can see I've finished them all here. Now I'm going to flip this over and we'll see what happens with the tape. Oh, look at how pretty that is. So it really looks 3D when you take that stencil off. Okay, so you can see my paper is starting to come up. Now I had mentioned that I had a problem when I used the surgical tape and left it on there overnight, and I exactly had this problem again. So my recommendation is, if you're going to leave your tape on overnight or for longer than 5 or 10 minutes, that you take it off or put it on the back like I did here. So fortunately I didn't have a problem because the paper came off the back, and who cares about that. So anyway, just an interesting note there. Now I went back in here and I touched up the white areas to make them a little bit whiter, but I wish I hadn't done that, because actually when the video was over and I took a photo of the card, I decided I didn't really like that to be so white, so I went back in and then colored it more of a yellow color. So I would skip this step. Okay, so now that I'm finished with this, I'm going to go ahead and trim out my card. When I come back, I've got 3 pieces now. I've got my card base, which is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch folded piece of Nina, and then I've got a black piece, which is Stampin' Up! Black, and I've cut it to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, so there's a 1/16 of an inch mat on all sides, and then my circle panel is 4 by 5 1/4, so it's another 1/16 of an inch edge on all sides. Now this is where the tricky part comes in. So I'm going to divide this into 3 parts, but I want to slice out a 1/16 of an inch in the middle. So I don't want to just cut it into 3 pieces and just sort of figure it out. I want it to be actually a piece omitted from the panel. So what you have to do is you have to measure from the left 1 11/16, mark that, and then mark 1/16 up from that. So you're marking 1 11/16 and then 1 12/16. And you do that from each side. And then what I'm doing here is I'm using my my T-square to make sure that my center panel is going to be exactly the same size as the other ones, which are 1 11/16. So those are the numbers if you don't want to do the math yourself. All right, so make sure you have those all lined up so that they match up, so that the circles match up. And I'm going to put the left-hand side on first, then I'll put the right-hand side on, and I'm barely laying it down there. So I don't want it to adhere just in case I got to pull it up because it doesn't come out right. And then I'll put the center one on, and hopefully, and mine actually turned out, I think, perfectly. There was a 1/16 of an inch edge between all the panels. I've got this new stamp set by Lawn Fawn called Scripty Sayings. It's got all your typical sayings. I'm going to use congratulations on this card, but you can pretty much use anything on this card. Alright, so here's the Misty. This is actually the first time I'm using it, so I'm going to slow it down a little bit and show you how I'm doing it, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in another video since I'm just doing this one sentiment here. So I'm taking a piece of vellum and lining it up in the lower left hand corner, and then I'm taking my stamp and I'm lining it up exactly where I want it to be on this piece of vellum. And I was very confused by this black piece of foam that came with it, but it turns out that the foam is for the clear stamps that don't have the cling rubber on them. So you would remove that piece of black foam when you had a cling rubber stamp. Anyway, so once I get that placed on the flip top lid panel, I can put my vellum back where it was in the lower left hand corner and take my ink. Now, this is kind of the dangerous part for me because this VersaFine ink has a flip top lid, and I'm always dropping it when I do this, where I flip it upside down to actually ink up a stamp. So you should remove all cards that you don't want to get any ink on out of the vicinity before you do something like this. Anyway, so then you'll flip it back over and press down, and it came out perfectly just like everybody said it would. So I was really happy with this first use of the Misty, and I went ahead and cleaned it with a baby wipe on the right hand side quickly, and then I just peeled it right off, and it was perfect. So anyway, I think I'm going to be using this again. I really enjoyed this first time, but I'll use it in a little bit more depth later. Now the ink was pretty wet on this vellum and I didn't want it to smear, so I went ahead and embossed it with some clear embossing powder. I've got my Stampin' Up! Heat tool, which has 2 settings, a low and a high, and I always heat my vellum on the low setting and it hardly ever warps. It does a little bit, but not nearly as much as the high setting, which is what I use on most other things. It takes a lot longer, but it's really worth it. Okay, so I've got these micro glue dots. They're very, very small. I think it's 1/8 of an inch. And I'm gonna kind of, I'm folding them into 2 parts, so half and then half, so 1/4. And then some of them didn't fold exactly, so I just rolled them in between my fingers. And I'm placing them in strategic portions of this sentiment so that you don't see them underneath. This one's going in the middle, right under the S, so I make sure I hit all 3 of these panels. So 1 on either side, and then 1 in the middle. So I'll take my ATG, and I'll adhere this to my card base, and my Scripty saying is going to extend across the whole card. Now when I first put it down, I realized that I didn't make enough of this squiggly going off the left that it would actually be cut off just like the right, so I picked it up, which was fine. The glue dots didn't rip the paper at all. And then I pressed down after I moved it a little bit over to the left. So once that's down, you can just turn it over and trim off the excess. And there you have it. I like that saying, how it goes, got that squiggly line that extends on both sides. Anyway, that's the card for you today. Please take the time to enter the March Challenge. I'm really, really excited about this, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.